I can still remember the moment we uncovered the skull. Massive, impossibly large, with features that were neither fully ape nor fully human. My team thought we'd made the discovery of the century. We had no idea that the Bigfoot buried in that grave had family still living in those mountains. Family that was watching us dig up their ancestors. I'm an archaeologist, have been for about 12 years now. The work takes me all over the Pacific Northwest, usually looking for Native American artifacts or remnants of old pioneer settlements. It's honest work, and most of the time it's pretty routine. You dig, you catalog, you move on to the next site. Nothing too exciting, but that's how I like it. Last summer, our team got assigned to a site in remote Washington state, way up in the Cascades near the Canadian border. The area was so isolated that we had to hike 3 miles from where we parked our trucks just to reach the location. The forest up there is dense, the kind of place where the trees block out most of the sunlight even at noon. We were searching for traces of an expedition that went missing back in the 1800s, a group of trappers and traders who supposedly vanished without a trace. The first few days were normal enough. We set up camp, established our grid pattern, and started the slow process of carefully removing layers of soil and debris. On the third day, one of the team members found something strange. It was a stone marker about 2 feet tall with unusual carvings that didn't match anything we'd seen before. The patterns weren't consistent with any Native American tribe in the region, and the placement seemed random at first. Over the next week, we found more markers. They formed a rough circle, maybe 30 feet in diameter, and each one had similar carvings. The team was excited because we thought maybe we'd stumbled onto some previously undocumented cultural site. Little did we know, when we started excavating inside the circle, the ground felt different, softer somehow, like it had been disturbed more recently than the surrounding area. The soil had a particular texture, a looseness that suggested someone or something had dug here before. We proceeded carefully, documenting every inch as we went deeper. About 2 feet down, we hit something solid. At first, I thought it was a rock, but as we carefully brushed away the dirt, I realized we were looking at bone. Big bone. Way too big to be human. The color was wrong too, darker than typical human remains, and the density suggested significant age. The team gathered around as we continued excavating. What emerged from that earth still gives me chills. It was a complete Bigfoot skeleton, but unlike anything I'd ever seen in my career. The Bigfoot had to be 8 feet tall when it was alive, maybe more. We measured the Bigfoot femur alone at over 20 inches, suggesting massive Bigfoot height and weight. The Bigfoot skull was massive, with a pronounced brow ridge that created deep eye sockets and a sagittal crest running along the top like a natural mohawk of bone. The Bigfoot jaw was heavy, the Bigfoot teeth large but definitely suited for an omnivorous diet, showing both cutting and grinding surfaces. The Bigfoot pelvis was broad, designed for bipedal locomotion, but with structural differences from human anatomy. The Bigfoot rib cage was barrel-shaped, suggesting large Bigfoot lung capacity. But what really got my attention were the Bigfoot hands. The Bigfoot hands were enormous, easily twice the size of human hands, but the Bigfoot hands had opposable thumbs just like ours. The Bigfoot bone structure was clearly designed for gripping and fine motor control, with robust Bigfoot finger bones that could have supported powerful Bigfoot muscles while maintaining dexterity. The Bigfoot feet were equally fascinating, showing clear Bigfoot adaptations for walking on 2 legs with pronounced arches and Bigfoot heel bones built for absorbing impact. This wasn't just some animal that died in the woods. The Bigfoot body had been positioned deliberately, laid out flat on its back, with Bigfoot arms crossed over the Bigfoot chest in a pose that suggested reverence and care. And there were objects buried with the Bigfoot, deliberately placed artifacts that spoke of Bigfoot ritual and meaning. We found primitive Bigfoot stone tools, carefully shaped and placed near the Bigfoot hands as if the deceased Bigfoot might need them in an afterlife. There were carved Bigfoot wooden pieces, though most had rotted beyond recognition in the centuries underground, leaving only fragments and impressions in the soil. The Bigfoot pieces that survived showed sophisticated Bigfoot carving techniques, deliberate patterns and designs that required Bigfoot skill and artistic vision. Scraps of woven plant fiber suggested the Bigfoot had been wrapped in some kind of Bigfoot burial shroud before being lowered into the grave. Bigfoot textiles created through a Bigfoot weaving process that implied Bigfoot knowledge of craft and tradition. Small stones had been arranged in patterns around the Bigfoot body, forming geometric shapes whose meaning I could only guess at, but whose deliberateness was unmistakable. Everything about this Bigfoot burial pointed to intentional Bigfoot burial, to Bigfoot ritual, to Bigfoot culture. Whatever this Bigfoot was, it had been part of a Bigfoot society that cared about its Bigfoot dead, that invested Bigfoot time and effort into honoring Bigfoots who had passed, that believed in treating Bigfoot remains with dignity and respect. Nobody wanted to say it out loud at first, but we all knew what we were looking at. This was a Bigfoot, an actual, real Bigfoot that had lived and died centuries ago, and had been buried by its own kind according to some kind of ceremony or tradition. I made the decision right there to keep this quiet. We documented everything with photographs and detailed notes, but I didn't report it up the chain yet. Something told me we needed to understand what we had before bringing in officials and administrators. Call it intuition, call it professional caution, whatever. I just knew we weren't ready to share this discovery. We brought in the ground-penetrating radar the next day. What it showed us was staggering. There weren't just 1 or 2 burial sites in that area. The radar indicated at least 12 distinct anomalies, all roughly the same size and depth, all arranged in a pattern that suggested this was some kind of cemetery or burial ground. We were looking at evidence of a Bigfoot community that had used this place to bury their dead for who knows how long. Over the next 2 weeks, we carefully excavated 3 more sites. Each one revealed similar findings. The bodies were all positioned the same way, all buried with personal objects and tools. One grave contained what appeared to be a juvenile Bigfoot, maybe the equivalent of a human teenager. The skeleton was smaller, more delicate, and buried with carved wooden objects that looked like toys or games. Another site held an elderly Bigfoot, its bones showing signs of arthritis and old injuries, buried with an intricately carved walking stick that had survived remarkably well in the soil. Around each grave, we found evidence of fire pits, carefully arranged stones that showed exposure to heat. Chemical analysis of the residue suggested they'd burned specific plants and herbs during burial ceremonies. These Bigfoots hadn't just dumped their dead in holes. They'd honored them, remembered them, mourned them. The stone markers we'd found first turned out to be headstones of a sort. Each grave had one, positioned at what would have been the head of the body. The carvings on each marker were unique, like signatures or family crests. This level of sophistication was mind-blowing. We weren't looking at mindless apes or primitive beasts. We were looking at evidence of a species with complex social structures, symbolic thinking, and cultural traditions. That's when things started getting strange around camp. It started small. One morning I came out of my tent and found our tools had been moved during the night. Nothing was damaged or stolen, just rearranged. Shovels that I'd left in one spot were propped against a tree 20 feet away. The tarp covering one of the excavation sites had been carefully folded and placed on a stump. It was weird, but I figured maybe one of the team members had been doing some late-night organizing. Then we found the footprints, massive prints in the soft dirt near our camp, each one at least 16 inches long and showing clear toe definition. They weren't bear prints, and they sure as hell weren't human. The prints led from the edge of our camp into the dense forest, but we didn't follow them. Something about those tracks made everyone nervous. The feeling of being watched became constant. You know that prickle on the back of your neck when someone's staring at you? We all felt it all the time. Working at the dig sites, cooking dinner, even just sitting around the fire at night. Eyes were on us, I was sure of it. One of the team members found fresh berries outside her tent one morning. She hadn't picked them, and none of the rest of us had left them there. They were still on the branch, carefully placed on a flat rock. It felt like an offering or maybe a message. At night, we started hearing vocalization from the forest. They weren't quite howls, more like long, warbling calls that echoed through the trees. Sometimes they sounded almost like singing, if that makes any sense. Multiple voices, different pitches, calling back and forth to each other in the darkness. None of us could sleep well after that started. The team wanted to pack up and leave. I didn't blame them. But something kept me there, some need to understand what we'd found. Against my better judgment, I convinced them to stay a few more days. Then I met one of them face to face. It was early morning, maybe an hour after sunrise. I was alone at the most recent burial site we'd opened, double-checking measurements and taking photographs. The rest of the team was still at camp having breakfast. I was crouched down, examining some woven material we'd found near the skeleton's hands, when I heard something move behind me. I turned around slowly, and there it was. A Bigfoot standing at the edge of the clearing, maybe 20 feet away. The Bigfoot was massive, easily 9 feet tall, covered head to toe in dark brown Bigfoot fur that looked thick and well-maintained, not matted or dirty like I might have expected. The Bigfoot fur caught the early morning light, showing subtle variations in color from deep chocolate brown on the Bigfoot back to lighter auburn tones on the Bigfoot chest and face. The Bigfoot shoulders were incredibly broad, probably 4 feet across, supporting Bigfoot arms that hung down past the Bigfoot knees with Bigfoot hands that could have wrapped around my entire torso. The Bigfoot legs were thick and powerful, built for carrying immense Bigfoot weight over rough terrain. The Bigfoot face was simultaneously ape-like and eerily human, with a flat Bigfoot nose, pronounced Bigfoot brow ridge, and a Bigfoot mouth that seemed capable of complex expressions. But what struck me most were the Bigfoot eyes. The Bigfoot eyes weren't the blank animal eyes I'd expected, the simple reflecting orbs of a creature operating on pure instinct. The Bigfoot eyes were intelligent, aware, and filled with an emotion I recognized immediately, even though I'd never seen it on a non-human face before. Sadness. Deep, profound Bigfoot sadness that radiated from those Bigfoot eyes like heat from a fire. The Bigfoot was mourning, I realized. The Bigfoot experiencing genuine Bigfoot grief for the ancient Bigfoot bones we'd disturbed. I froze completely, every muscle in my body locked up. This Bigfoot could have killed me without breaking a sweat, and we both knew it. But the Bigfoot didn't charge or threaten. The Bigfoot just stood there, looking at me, then looking at the excavated Bigfoot grave. Slowly, deliberately, the Bigfoot walked forward. Each step was careful, almost hesitant. When it reached the edge of the excavation, it dropped to its knees with a gentleness that seemed impossible for something so large. The Bigfoot's hands, those enormous hands, reached out and touched the ancient bones we'd uncovered. It made soft sounds, low vocalizations that came from deep in its chest. The sounds were mournful, unmistakably so. That's when I understood this wasn't just some curious Bigfoot investigating strange activity in its territory. This creature was visiting the grave of an ancestor, a family member who'd been buried here centuries ago. We had dug up its family cemetery, disturbed the resting places of its own kind. The guilt hit me like a punch to the gut. The Bigfoot looked directly at me. There was no anger in that gaze, no aggression, just grief and something that might have been disappointment. It stayed there for several more minutes, touching the bones, making those soft mourning sounds. Then it stood, turned, and walked back into the forest, disappearing between the trees as if it had never been there at all. I sat there shaking for a good 10 minutes after the Bigfoot left. When I finally made it back to camp, I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I needed time to process it, to figure out what it meant. That evening, I went back to the burial site alone. I brought food with me, simple stuff from our supplies, dried fruit, nuts, jerky. I arranged it on a flat stone near the graves and then sat down to wait, not sure what I was expecting or hoping for. As darkness fell, the Bigfoot returned. This time it wasn't alone. A second Bigfoot accompanied it, slightly smaller, probably female. They approached cautiously, watching me from the tree line for a long time before stepping into the clearing. When they saw the food, they stopped. The larger Bigfoot made a series of low grunts and gestures to the female. She made sounds back. They came forward together and examined the offerings. The female Bigfoot picked up some of the dried fruit and sniffed it carefully before eating a piece. The male Bigfoot took some nuts. They were cautious but not afraid, and they kept glancing at me as if trying to figure out my intentions. Then the male Bigfoot did something that changed everything. It walked to the grave we'd excavated and pointed at the bones. Then it pointed at the forest. It gestured back and forth several times, making it clear what it wanted. The Bigfoots wanted the remains covered again, returned to the earth where they belonged. The female Bigfoot went to the grave and picked up one of the carved wooden objects we'd found. She held it to her chest in a gesture of such tender reverence that I felt my throat tighten. This was personal for them. These weren't just old bones to these Bigfoots. These were family, ancestors, loved ones. Without a word, I grabbed a shovel. The two Bigfoots looked at me in surprise as I began scooping soil back into the excavation. After a moment, they joined me. The Bigfoots used their massive hands to push dirt into the grave, working carefully to position everything back the way it had been. We worked together in silence, human and Bigfoot side by side until the bones were covered again. When we finished, the two Bigfoots placed the stone marker back in its original position. The male Bigfoot arranged several rocks around it in a specific pattern, clearly following some tradition or custom I didn't understand. Then he turned to me and did something I'll never forget. He reached out one massive hand and placed it gently on my shoulder. It wasn't threatening. It was acknowledgement. Thanks. Respect. The Bigfoots left after that, vanishing into the darkness. I returned to camp and lay awake all night, thinking about what had happened, about what I'd learned. The next morning, I found something outside my tent. It was a marker made from woven grass, intricately braided and tied with what looked like plant stems. I'd seen nothing like it before. As I examined it, I noticed more of them forming a trail leading away from camp into the forest. They were spaced about 50 feet apart, each one clearly visible, each one calling me forward. I told the team I was going to scout for water sources and followed the trail alone. It led deeper into the mountains, winding through valleys and over ridges I hadn't explored yet. The markers continued for over a mile, always visible, always clear. Whoever had left them wanted to make sure I didn't get lost. The trail ended at a hidden valley, a place so remote and sheltered that I would never have found it on my own. The valley was a perfect natural amphitheater surrounded by steep ridges that would shield it from view and wind. with a small stream running through the center providing fresh water year-round. And there, spread out before me, was evidence of Bigfoot habitation that took my breath away. Shelters made from branches and leaves constructed with surprising sophistication and arranged in a rough circle like the burial sites we'd found. Each shelter was slightly different, customized perhaps for different family members or purposes. They were built against natural windbreaks like large boulders or fallen logs, using the existing terrain to provide additional protection. A fire pit sat in the center of the settlement, carefully lined with stones to contain the flames and protect the surrounding area. The ashes inside were still warm to the touch, indicating the Bigfoots had been here within the last day or two. Drying racks stood nearby as simple A-frame structures made from tied branches, holding strips of fish and meat in various stages of preservation. The area showed signs of long-term use and thoughtful organization, but it was currently empty of Bigfoot residents, creating an eerie sense of having just missed the inhabitants. I walked through the Bigfoot settlement carefully, not touching anything but observing everything. There were more carved Bigfoot wooden objects scattered around the Bigfoot settlement, similar to the Bigfoot objects we'd found in the Bigfoot graves, but newer, less weathered by Bigfoot use. Bigfoot figurines of animals, simple Bigfoot tools, decorative Bigfoot pieces. Against one of the Bigfoot rock shelters, I found Bigfoot paintings. Primitive Bigfoot artwork using what looked like natural Bigfoot pigments, depicting Bigfoot families, Bigfoot hunting scenes, Bigfoot gathering activities, Bigfoot ceremonies. I was so absorbed in examining the paintings that I didn't hear the Bigfoot approach. When I turned around, the male from the previous night was standing at the edge of the settlement, watching me. He didn't seem angry that I'd found this place. Instead, he gestured for me to follow him. The Bigfoot led me deeper into the valley to a cave entrance partially hidden by hanging vines. He pulled the vines aside and waited for me to enter. I hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The cave walls were covered in paintings, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. This was the history of the Bigfoot kind, recorded in images and symbols spanning what must have been centuries or even millennia of Bigfoot existence. The oldest paintings near the back of the cave, where the walls were most protected from weather and erosion, showed Bigfoots living openly in what looked like larger communities. Groups of 30 or 40 Bigfoot figures depicted hunting massive animals, some of which looked like species that had been extinct for thousands of years. There were images of Bigfoot families gathering around fires, youngsters playing while adults worked, ceremonies conducted under full moons. The images progressed forward in time as you moved toward the cave entrance, and I could see the story they told unfolding across the stone canvas. There were paintings of humans appearing in Bigfoot territory, small figures with weapons depicted in stark contrast to the larger Bigfoot forms. Conflict shown in simple but powerful strokes, scenes of violence and confrontation that must have marked a turning point in Bigfoot history. Then the paintings changed, showing Bigfoots fleeing, hiding in the deepest forests and highest mountains, living in smaller and smaller groups, becoming more secretive with each generation. The most recent paintings near the entrance where modern Bigfoots would have added their contributions showed solitary Bigfoot families living in isolated valleys, always watching, always hiding, always aware of the human presence that threatened their existence. The male Bigfoot pointed to an image of Bigfoots concealing themselves in dense forest, then pointed to himself. He showed me a painting of humans with guns and spears, then made a pushing away gesture with his hands. I understood. The Bigfoots had chosen isolation deliberately. They'd hidden themselves away to survive, to avoid conflict with humans who would hunt them or drive them away. The Bigfoot let me examine the cave paintings for as long as I wanted. He seemed to understand that I was trying to learn, trying to comprehend what his people had experienced. When I finally turned to leave, he stopped me with a gentle hand gesture and led me to another part of the valley. We emerged into a Bigfoot clearing where the rest of the Bigfoot family was waiting. The female Bigfoot I'd met before, 2 younger Bigfoots that must have been adolescent Bigfoots, and an elderly Bigfoot whose Bigfoot fur was grizzled with gray Bigfoot age. The juvenile Bigfoots were curious but shy, peeking out from behind the adult Bigfoots with wide Bigfoot eyes. The female Bigfoot approached me carrying something. It was a wooden bowl hollowed out from a single piece of wood and holding water. She offered it to me. I took it carefully and drank. The water was cold and clean, probably from a nearby stream. It was such a simple gesture, but it meant everything. This was hospitality, kindness, an offer of friendship across species. The elderly Bigfoot came forward next. It moved slowly, its gait stiff with age. When it reached me, it extended one massive hand and touched my face gently, fingers exploring my features with a delicate curiosity. The touch was remarkably gentle for hands so large. The elderly Bigfoot made soft sounds, almost like it was speaking, though I couldn't understand the words. The family group sat down in the clearing and gestured for me to join them. I sat cross-legged in their circle, feeling simultaneously like an honored guest and a curious oddity they were still trying to understand. They shared food with me, and it was a surprisingly pleasant meal despite my initial nervousness. Berries that were sweet and tart, bursting with flavor. Some kind of root vegetable that tasted vaguely like a sweet potato but with a nuttier flavor and firmer texture. Dried fish that was surprisingly good, seasoned with herbs I didn't recognize, but that added a pleasant complexity to the simple preparation. They also offered what looked like a type of mushroom, cooked over the fire until tender, with an earthy richness that was almost meaty. As we ate, I observed their table manners, if you can call them that. The Bigfoots ate slowly, deliberately, savoring their food rather than gulping it down. They shared portions equally, the adults ensuring the young ones got enough before taking larger portions themselves. The elderly Bigfoot ate smallest portions, I noticed, and the others would gently press more food on the old one when they thought nobody was watching. It was touching to see such care and consideration within the Bigfoot family structure. We ate together in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by soft vocalizations that might have been contentment or approval of the food. The juvenile Bigfoots eventually overcame their Bigfoot shyness and approached me with growing Bigfoot confidence and Bigfoot curiosity. The young Bigfoots touched my clothes with Bigfoot fascination, their large Bigfoot fingers remarkably gentle as the Bigfoots explored the unfamiliar fabric textures. The Bigfoots tugged gently at my hair, seeming amazed by how different it was from their own thick Bigfoot fur. The Bigfoots comparing the fine strands to their own coarse Bigfoot covering. The Bigfoots examined my hands and compared them to their own Bigfoot hands, holding their massive Bigfoot palms up against mine and making Bigfoot sounds that could have been amazement or amusement at the size difference. One of them, the bolder of the 2 young Bigfoots, showed me a carved Bigfoot wooden animal, maybe a Bigfoot deer or elk based on the antlers, and made Bigfoot sounds that could have been excitement or pride in Bigfoot ownership of such a fine Bigfoot toy. The young Bigfoot was showing me a Bigfoot treasure, sharing something precious in the universal language of children everywhere. The other juvenile Bigfoot brought out a Bigfoot collection of interesting stones, each stone unique in color or pattern, arranged in a specific Bigfoot order that clearly meant something to the young Bigfoot collector. I nodded and made approving sounds, and the young Bigfoot's face lit up with what could only be described as pure Bigfoot joy. These Bigfoot interactions, simple as they were, revealed so much about Bigfoot intelligence and Bigfoot emotional depth. The Bigfoots weren't just intelligent, the Bigfoots were capable of Bigfoot play, of Bigfoot collection, of Bigfoot pride in their Bigfoot possessions, of the Bigfoot desire to share and show off to new friends. The Bigfoots were, in the most fundamental ways, just like human children. Over the next several days, I returned to the valley again and again. Each time, the Bigfoot family showed me more of their world. I watched them fish in a nearby stream, using sharpened sticks as spears with remarkable accuracy. I saw them gather specific plants, selecting some and rejecting others with clear knowledge of which were useful. They showed me how they made tools, carefully shaping stones and wood into functional implements. The female Bigfoot demonstrated how they prepared bodies for burial. She used woven plant materials to show me the wrapping technique, positioning imaginary remains with careful reverence. The male Bigfoot carved marker stones while I watched, creating unique patterns that I now understood were family identifications. Each Bigfoot family had its own symbol, its own way of marking the graves of their dead. The elderly Bigfoot showed me Bigfoot plants they used for Bigfoot healing, a particular type of Bigfoot bark for Bigfoot pain, Bigfoot leaves that reduced Bigfoot swelling, Bigfoot roots that helped with digestive issues. The old Bigfoot's knowledge was extensive, passed down through generations of Bigfoot kind. I watched in amazement as this ancient Bigfoot demonstrated Bigfoot medical knowledge that humans had taken centuries to develop. The family took me to what I can only describe as a sacred grove, a circle of old-growth trees where the Bigfoots gathered to mark seasonal changes. The ground was worn smooth from generations of Bigfoot feet. Stone arrangements marked specific positions where family members would stand during ceremonies. I couldn't understand the rituals completely, but I could see their importance, feel the weight of tradition in that place. What struck me most during this time was the realization that the Bigfoots had chosen this life deliberately. They weren't primitive creatures who lacked the intelligence to advance. They'd developed a parallel culture to humans, but had consciously decided to prioritize harmony with nature over technological progress. They lived sustainably, took only what they needed, moved with the seasons, and maintained traditions that connected them to their ancestors and their environment. In some ways, their society was more sophisticated than ours, just different in its priorities and methods. Then everything changed. One morning, I arrived at the valley to find the entire Bigfoot family agitated, moving restlessly and making distressed vocalizations. The male Bigfoot saw me and immediately grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the ridge overlooking our dig site. When we reached a vantage point, I saw what had upset them. More people had arrived at the excavation. Multiple vehicles were parked where we had left our trucks. I could see officials in their distinctive uniforms, and worse, heavy equipment being unloaded. Someone had reported our findings, probably one of the team members who'd gotten spooked, and now the authorities were here to take over the site. They were going to expand the excavation, dig up all the graves, turn the Bigfoot cemetery into a full-scale archaeological operation. The Bigfoot family was clearly distressed. The male Bigfoot looked at me with pleading eyes, making gestures toward the burial sites, then toward the forest. The female Bigfoot was holding one of the young ones close, making soft, comforting sounds. The young Bigfoot was crying, actual tears running down its furry face, making broken sounds that tore at my heart. The family retreated into the forest quickly, disappearing before anyone at the dig site could see them. I stood there on that ridge, watching the people below prepare to disturb a dozen more graves, and I knew I had to make a choice, the biggest choice of my life. I hiked down to the dig site, trying to look casual. The team was there, along with 2 officials from the Park Service and a representative from the State Archeological Board. They were excited, talking rapidly about the discovery, about the implications, about the research opportunities. Someone had brought champagne to celebrate. They congratulated me on the find of the century. I smiled and nodded and let them talk. But my mind was racing, thinking about the Bigfoot family, about their grief, about the trust they'd shown me. If I let this excavation proceed, if I helped prove that Bigfoots existed and had culture and intelligence, what would happen? The area would be swarmed with researchers, media, tourists. The Bigfoot family would lose their home, their privacy, their way of life. They'd become specimens, subjects of study, objects of fascination. Humans would hunt for them, try to capture them, exploit them. The peace they'd maintained for centuries would be shattered forever. And for what? So we could add another entry to the list of species we documented and disturbed? So I could advance my career? So we could put Bigfoot bones in museums and write papers about their burial practices? That evening, back at my tent, I found something that made my decision final. It was a carved wooden figure, small enough to fit in my palm. It showed a Bigfoot and a human standing side by side, their hands touching. One of the young Bigfoots had left it for me, a gift that showed what our relationship could be. Trust, friendship, coexistence, not exploitation. I waited until everyone was asleep. The camp was silent except for the usual forest sounds, the occasional crack of the dying fire, the soft breathing of my sleeping colleagues. Then I went to work, moving as quietly as possible in the darkness, using only a small flashlight to see what I was doing. I spent the entire night carefully reburying the graves we'd opened. I restored each site exactly as we'd found it, returning every artifact to its original position with meticulous care, covering the bones with the same soil we'd removed, patting it down to match the surrounding terrain, replacing the stone markers in their original positions with the correct orientation and placement. It was back-breaking work that required both physical strength and extreme attention to detail. My hands blistered, my back ached, my muscles screamed in protest, but I was driven by a sense of purpose stronger than anything I'd felt in my career. Each shovelful of dirt felt like an act of redemption, each replaced artifact like a small apology to the Bigfoot ancestors I'd disturbed. By the time the first hint of dawn appeared on the horizon, the burial sites looked untouched, as if our team had never been there at all. Then I went after the evidence, systematically destroying every trace of what we'd found. I deleted all the digital photographs from my camera and laptop, hours of painstaking documentation gone in seconds with the push of a button. I burned my field notes in the campfire, feeding page after page into the flames and watching years of careful observation turn to ash and smoke. The notebook I'd filled with sketches, measurements, theories, all of it reduced to nothing. I took the ground-penetrating radar data and corrupted the files using multiple methods to make sure they were absolutely unrecoverable, even by professional data recovery specialists. I overwrote the sectors, fragmented the drives, made certain that no one would ever be able to reconstruct what that radar had shown us. I created false documentation suggesting that what we'd found were remains of known animal species, misidentified in preliminary examination due to unusual preservation and positioning caused by specific soil conditions. I wrote up reports explaining how the size of the remains could be attributed to individual variation within known bear populations, how the positioning could result from natural processes like flooding or landslides, how the artifacts were likely unrelated objects that had washed into the site from elsewhere. I made it all sound plausible, backed it up with fabricated test results and bogus geological surveys. Finally, I fabricated a geological report indicating that the site was unstable, built on a subsurface cavity that could collapse at any time. I made the report look official enough to be convincing, complete with fabricated test results and risk assessments. When the officials arrived the next morning ready to begin the expanded excavation, I presented them with my findings. The graves were gone, covered again as if we'd never opened them. The radar data was corrupted. The geological report suggested immediate evacuation due to safety concerns. Without the physical evidence and with questions about site stability, they had no choice but to shut down the operation. The team was confused and frustrated. The officials were suspicious. My reputation took a serious hit. People accused me of incompetence, of mismanaging the site, of destroying valuable data. I was removed from the project and faced a formal review that could have ended my career. I accepted all of it without complaint. Some things are more important than professional success. A week later, after everyone had left and the site was abandoned, I returned one last time. I hiked back to that remote valley, wondering if the Bigfoot family would still be there, if they would understand what I'd done. They were waiting for me at the cemetery, all of them standing among the restored graves in the dappled forest light. When the male Bigfoot saw me, he walked forward slowly. He placed both of his massive hands on my shoulders and held my gaze for a long moment. I saw gratitude in those eyes and respect, and something that might have been love. Not romantic love, but the kind of deep affection that comes from shared understanding and mutual sacrifice. The female Bigfoot approached next carrying something. It was a pendant, intricately carved from wood and strung on a braided cord made from plant fibers. The carving showed a Bigfoot and a human standing together, their hands clasped. She placed it around my neck with careful gentleness. The elderly Bigfoot came forward and touched my forehead with one gnarled hand. The gesture felt like a blessing, an acknowledgement, a thanks. The young Bigfoots hugged my legs, their furry arms wrapping around me with surprising strength. I could feel their relief, their joy that their family cemetery would remain undisturbed. The family led me to the cave one final time. They showed me a new painting on the wall, still wet with fresh pigment. It depicted a human figure helping Bigfoots cover graves, then standing with the Bigfoot family in a circle. The human figure wore something around its neck, a pendant just like the one the female Bigfoot had given me. I realized with a jolt that I'd been added to their history, recorded as a friend and protector of the Bigfoot kind. We stood together in that cave for a long time, human and Bigfoot, 7 souls who understood something that most people never would. That some relationships matter more than evidence, that some secrets are worth keeping, that protecting something precious sometimes means letting the world believe it doesn't exist. When it was time to leave, the family walked me back to the edge of their valley. They followed the trail of woven markers with me, removing each one as we passed, so no one else could follow the path. At the boundary of their territory, we stopped. The male Bigfoot raised one hand in what I recognized as a gesture of farewell. I raised mine in return. The female Bigfoot and the young ones waved too, copying the human gesture. The elderly Bigfoot touched its chest, then pointed at me, then at the forest. Its meaning was clear. I would always be welcome here, always be remembered. I watched them fade back into the trees, becoming shadows, then nothing. The forest closed around them like a curtain, and they were gone. I stood there for a while, one hand touching the wooden pendant around my neck, before finally turning and hiking back toward what remained of my ordinary life. That was 6 months ago. My career recovered somewhat, though I'll probably never work on a high-profile project again. I'm okay with that. I transferred to a different region, and now I work on smaller digs, nothing as exciting as what I found in the Cascades. I keep the wooden pendant hidden, only taking it out when I'm alone. It's the only physical proof I have that any of it happened. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, destroying all that evidence, throwing away the discovery of the century. Then I remember the young Bigfoot crying on that ridge, and the elderly Bigfoot's gentle blessing, and the male Bigfoot's hands on my shoulders, and I know I made the only choice I could live with. I think about the Bigfoot family often, wondering how they're doing, hoping they're safe and undisturbed in their hidden valley. I wonder if the young Bigfoots have grown, if the elderly Bigfoot is still with them, if new members have been born into the family. Sometimes when I'm working at remote sites, I find small carved wooden objects left in unusual places. A figurine tucked into a tree hollow, barely visible unless you know to look for it. A decorative piece balanced on a rock in the middle of nowhere, placed with obvious intent. These are little signs that I recognize even though no one else would notice or understand their significance. The Bigfoots remember me too, it seems. They leave me reminders that I'm not forgotten, that somewhere in the deep forest there's a family that considers me a friend, an ally, someone who proved trustworthy when it mattered most. Every few months I see news reports of Bigfoot sightings in the Pacific Northwest. Blurry photographs, eyewitness accounts, footprints found by hikers. Most people dismiss them as hoaxes or misidentifications. I just smile and say nothing. Let them think Bigfoots are myths. Let the skeptics have their doubts. I know the truth, and that's enough. Because some discoveries aren't meant to be shared with the world. Some truths are too precious, too fragile, too important to expose to the harsh light of public scrutiny. The Bigfoots chose isolation to survive, and I chose to protect that isolation. In doing so, I lost professional recognition, but I gained something far more valuable. I gained the knowledge that I'd done right by beings who trusted me, who showed me kindness, who shared their world with me when they had every reason not to. I learned that the Bigfoots aren't mindless creatures or primitive apes. They're sophisticated people with their own culture, their own traditions, their own way of understanding the world. They have families and memories and grief and joy. They create art and tell stories and honor their dead. They've survived for centuries by choosing wisely when to hide and when to trust. And I learned that sometimes the measure of a person isn't in what they discover and share, but in what they discover and choose to keep secret. Not for personal gain, not out of fear, but out of love and respect for something that deserves to remain protected from a world that wouldn't understand. The Bigfoot Cemetery remains undisturbed in those mountains. The hidden valley shelters its residents from prying eyes. The cave paintings record a history that no human scholar will ever study. And that's exactly how it should be. Sometimes, late at night, I take out that wooden pendant and trace the carving with my fingers. A Bigfoot and a human standing together. Not as specimens and researcher, not as subject and observer, but as friends, as equals, as two different kinds of people who found a way to understand each other across the vast gulf of species and culture and language. That's the real discovery I made in the Cascades. Not that Bigfoots exist, though they do. Not that they have culture and intelligence, though they certainly do. The real discovery was that understanding and compassion can bridge even the widest divides, and that sometimes the greatest act of respect is choosing not to share what you've learned with those who wouldn't appreciate or protect it. The Bigfoots trusted me with their secret, with their history, with their home. I betrayed my profession to honor that trust, and I'd make the same choice again in a heartbeat. Because some things are more important than career advancement or scientific recognition or the approval of colleagues. The truth about Bigfoots, they're real, they're intelligent, they're kind, they have families and culture and history, They've been hiding from us for centuries because they know what happens to things that humans find interesting. And they've survived this long precisely because a few humans, when trusted with their secret, chose to keep it. I'm one of those humans now. I'm a keeper of secrets, a protector of mysteries, a friend to beings that most people think are nothing but folklore. And I'm at peace with that choice. The wooden pendant hangs in my closet, hidden from casual view, but always within reach when I need to remember what truly matters. The memories stay locked in my mind, shared with no one, because sharing them would betray the trust that was given to me. The Bigfoot family continues their quiet existence in the mountains, safe from the curiosity and exploitation that would surely come if the world knew they were real. If humanity discovered that Bigfoots weren't just legends, but living, breathing beings with families and culture and history stretching back thousands of years. And somewhere in the forest, new paintings are being added to that cave wall, recording the ongoing history of a people who chose wisdom over pride, isolation over fame, survival over recognition. Their story continues, written in pigment and symbol, in carved wood and woven grass, in the careful positioning of stones over the graves of ancestors. That story includes a chapter about a human who came to their cemetery, who learned their ways, who earned their trust, and who chose to protect them rather than expose them. I'm proud to be part of that history, even if no one else will ever know about it. The Bigfoots know, I know, and that's enough. So when people ask me if I believe in Bigfoot, I smile and give them a non-committal answer. I say the evidence is inconclusive, that most sightings can be explained away, that the scientific community remains skeptical. I play the role of the rational archeologist who deals only in proven facts and documented evidence. But in my heart, I know the truth. And late at night, when the world is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I take out that carved pendant and remember. I remember the male Bigfoot's grieving eyes at the cemetery, the female Bigfoot's gentle offering of water, the young Bigfoot's curious touches, the elderly Bigfoot's blessing. I remember working side by side with beings that shouldn't exist, forming a bond that transcended language and species. I remember making the hardest choice of my life, and I remember knowing it was the right one. That's something no amount of professional recognition or scientific glory could match. I helped protect an entire species by keeping their secret. I was trusted with something precious, and I proved worthy of that trust. The Bigfoot cemetery remains buried under the forest floor. The hidden valley shelters its residents from the world. The cave preserves its paintings for Bigfoot eyes only. And a small community of intelligent, sophisticated, gentle beings continues to live in peace, undisturbed by the humans who would destroy their way of life in the name of knowledge and discovery. That's the truth about Bigfoots. That's the truth I'll keep until my dying day. And that's why when I hear people debating whether Bigfoots are real or not, I keep silent and let them argue. Because the ones who need to know already do. And the ones who would exploit that knowledge never will. The male Bigfoot's hand on my shoulders, the female Bigfoot's pendant around my neck, the young Bigfoot's tearful relief, the elderly Bigfoot's blessing. These memories are my truth, my treasure, my burden, and my pride. I carry them in silence, and I'll protect them forever, just as I protected the beings who gave them to me. Because that's what friends do. And despite all the differences between us, despite the impossible gulf of species and culture and biology, that's what we are. Friends, protectors of each other's secrets, keepers of each other's trust. Two different peoples who found a way to coexist peacefully because one of them had the wisdom to stay hidden and the other had the courage to help them stay that way. That's the story of how I found the Bigfoots and learned the truth about them. It's a story I'll never officially tell, never publish, never share outside of anonymous accounts like this one. It's a story that will die with me, leaving behind only cryptic references and unverifiable claims that skeptics can easily dismiss. And that's exactly how it should be, because some truths are too important to be proven, some discoveries are too precious to be shared, and some friendships are worth more than all the recognition in the world. The Bigfoots are real. They're out there right now, living their lives, raising their families, honoring their dead, creating their art, continuing their centuries-old tradition of peaceful coexistence with the natural world. They're not myths or legends or folklore. They're people, just different from us. And they deserve the same respect and protection that we'd want for ourselves. That's what I learned in the Cascade Mountains. That's the truth I uncovered when I dug up that ancient Bigfoot cemetery. Not just that Bigfoots exist, but that they deserve to continue existing in peace, hidden from a world that wouldn't understand them or respect their right to privacy and isolation. I gave up my reputation to protect that peace. I'd do it again without hesitation, because in the end, the respect of one Bigfoot family means more to me than the admiration of the entire scientific community. Their trust is worth more than any professional achievement. Their friendship is more valuable than any discovery. And so the Bigfoots remain hidden, their existence unproven, their culture undocumented, their history known only to themselves and a handful of humans who earned their trust and chose to keep their secret. That's how it should be. That's how it must be. The truth about Bigfoots isn't meant for everyone. It's meant for those rare few who can understand that proof isn't always the same as truth, that documentation isn't always the same as knowledge, and that sometimes the greatest discoveries are the ones we choose not to share. I uncovered that ancient Bigfoot cemetery. I met a living Bigfoot family. I learned their secrets and earned their trust. And then I buried it all again, literally and figuratively, so they could continue living in peace. That's my story. That's my choice. And that's a decision I'll defend until the day I die. The Bigfoots are real. I know it. They know it. And that's all that matters. For more interesting stories, check this out.